Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Hey folks, what is it about the belief in government that keeps people so dug in and they refuse to take a step back and realize it is all theater? Many of you know someone who just won't let go of that belief, and you may wonder if there is hope for that person. Jeffrey Hann comes back on the show to talk about this in his new book titled The Fallacious Belief in Government, Warp Speed Toward Tyranny.
Let's go. Yeah. Left, right, left, right, left. We got our marching orders, man. Left, right, left, right. We'd rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live.
Jeffrey, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
You were on before with your COVID-19, a short path to you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. You know, that was the first time I had you on the show. We talked about that. I've still got that book on my shelf and I think I remember telling you during that conversation that I want to keep this on hand because it's a great resource. It's got a lot of information in there that talks about everything that you want to know that was going down with the government and COVID-19. It's all in that book. It's a great resource, folks. If y'all have not picked that up, even though it feels like we're not in those 2020, 2021 days anymore, but it doesn't mean it won't happen again.
No, it definitely describes what I believe is still coming down the pipe at us.
Yeah.
So at least it gives the foundation, and then I pick back up with my second book. What
have you been up to other than writing this new book? You know, I know you've got a lot going on too, but what's Jeffrey been up to?
Besides the book, started dabbling in music production and came up with like 2 albums that I've released. The Fallacious Belief in Government was one, and Militant Anarchist is the second one. So those are on my YouTube channel, JRev Music. And they're on all streaming services like Spotify or Pandora, so they can all be looked up. But it's just trying to get the message across of where I kind of stand in my philosophical beliefs, and trying to convince people there's another way forward than the tyranny we're witnessing today.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough out there to watch. I don't know if people are actually. I've had some really strange conversations with folks who are still, like I mentioned in the intro, who are still dug in their belief when it comes to government, and the fact that they can't look and see what's happening right before our eyes is the strangest thing to me. And we'll, here in a minute when we get started talking about your book, we're going to talk about critical thinking, and I think that plays a huge role.
Absolutely,
because people cannot think for themselves these days.
Correct. Yeah, and it's interesting. So I came up with this book basically when I did Pork Fest last year. My main presentation was the Fallacious Belief in Government, and I took that presentation and built it out and turned it into this book. And my takeaway from Pork Fest was that even though it should be all about this message, most people even there aren't ready to let go of government. They still think they can fix it and that there's another way, even though thousands of years of history prove that that's not true. And so it's definitely a deeply rooted belief structure that most people have that is, trying to get through is hard.
Well, and I've mentioned this recently too, that on this show, I'm pretty sure it was on the show, or maybe it was on another podcast, but I remember when I was kind of coming out of my way of thinking and the things I used to believe, it was a little uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Because I was convinced that I had it all figured out. You know what I mean? I figured I had it all figured out. This is the right way. We're going to, and then turns out I was wrong about everything. And once you start, and I don't know that I'm prideful, but I like to believe that I've got a pretty good head on my shoulders. And when you realize, and when your eyes are open to something like that, and you realize that you've been wrong about everything, it's a little humbling, to be honest with you.
It can be, absolutely. And that's the big thing about critical thinking, is that you have to, as a skill set, you have to understand that you could be wrong and always have that in the back of your mind. And most people don't think that because they've been indoctrinated since birth that government is the only way, because without government, you'd have barbarism, or like how they like to label it, anarchism. And which is not the case.
How many times have we heard that? It'll be complete anarchy without government.
Absolutely. I mean, every time I tell people I'm an anarchist, I always caveat that going, I'm not Antifa, because they're not anarchists.
Right.
I always want to caveat, because most people associate Antifa with anarchism, and I'm like, that's not even remotely close.
Well, because they're listening to morons like Sean Hannity and Donald Trump, when they talk about anarchy, and those are the last two people that are ever going to have any understanding of what true anarchism is. And I that's one of those things too. When I watch people, when we're talking about critical thinking, I watch them surround Fox News Channel at work in the break room and just soaking all that stuff up. I mean, I used to do it, so I know I was guilty of it too, but watching them just take all that in as truth and news it's really kind of sad to me to watch. It's almost like they're in a daze. And I've said this a lot too. Speaking of your book, the first book, I feel like, and I don't know how you feel about this, it seems like a lot of the critical thinking aspect for folks has gotten so bad now that it seems like there's some kind of brain fog since 2020 that people can't work their way out of it. And now they're just zombies.
I think it's not just that. It's everything. I mean, your nonstop fear for over a decade now from the government, psychological operations, like when you actually see the entire picture and scope of the game that's being played globally by all of these different parties and interests and groups and things like that, and what's really going on, it's definitely overwhelming if you can't see the patterns in it. And it just seems like pure chaos, but it's all scripted. Everything we're seeing is all playing out because there's a point to it, and there's something big coming down the road. And we discussed it, and I talk about it in my first book, not so much in my second book, but about that natural age ender that I believe is coming, 2035 to 2050 range. And I believe everything we're witnessing is gearing us up towards that. And we're going to see a lot of big changes. And we're still on track. I do believe we're going to see the start of a bird flu pandemic this year. And I called that out in the first book and in the second book, and we can get into it more. And it's under the conspiracy theories chapter. But from my first book, the COVID-19 one, I made the correlation that all of the human trials for the mRNA vaccines were actually driving all of the variants, because all the variants that they were tracking, Omicron, Delta, those things all came out of locations that had those human trials going on. So fast forward to now, this past December, the first human trials for the bird flu mRNA vaccine started. And so in my book, I make that correlation that's wildly what's going to drive the bird flu pandemic. And they might blame it on a million of other things. They might say, turbo cancers or terrorist attack, doesn't really matter. But now we're already seeing, I just saw a report like yesterday that there's now 70 cases of bird flu in humans. And last year, I think, was the first time a human was ever infected with bird flu. And now you have this mRNA vaccine, and then now you're starting to see a bunch more people. So by the end of the year, we might see the start of a bird flu pandemic, which in my first book, there was an ex-CIA director that even said that the real pandemic is going to be a bird flu pandemic. And that's talking, a 10 to 20% mortality rate, potentially. And if you think about COVID-19, that was like a 0.2% mortality rate overall when all said was done. And so if you had a 0.2% versus a 10 to 20% mortality rate, you're talking a huge increase in deaths that are going to be associated to it, and people are going to freak out. They freaked out over COVID-19. Now give them something that really affects them, and it's going to get crazy.
I was thinking about that while you were talking, because the way we saw people behave and the way they reacted to COVID, if it's going to be that bad with the bird flu, I can't imagine. We better start buying toilet paper right now.
Right. You go ahead and just start stocking up now.
Just have a garage full of toilet paper.
Right.
And sell it.
I mean, yeah. Or people are going to start buying it from, China, and even with the tariffs.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking too, with the bird flu stuff, that I don't pay a lot of attention to them, but I'll hear things from time to time. That Kennedy guy, is he not pushing something like this, or Or is it the measles vaccine I'm thinking of?
Yeah, I mean, he says he's against vaccines, but he's really not. He openly states that he's pro-vaccines, and Trump gave us the COVID-19 vaccines, even though a lot of people try to say that it was actually Biden. And Biden just said, "Hey, the feds have to take it," and that he recommended that everyone requires it. But really, when it came down to, he actually didn't force it. So I knew a handful of people that worked for the feds and different agencies, and they initially came down saying, "Hey, you have to get vaccinated," and then that was it. They only told people they had to do it. They actually never enforced it, and he could only control the executive branch with his executive order. So it's but a lot of people like to say that it was Biden's vaccine when really it was Trump's. And because the right, it's a cult. So they don't want to blame Trump. And I'm like, but he's going to give us the bird flu vaccine. And are you guys going to take it? Because he says, no, this time it's good for you.
They are in a cult. And I told them that. I tell them all the time, I said, you're in a cult. You act just like you're in a cult, the way you behave. I mean, Trump literally called himself the father of the vaccine.
Absolutely.
He is still taking credit for the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah.
To this day, his supporters just gloss over it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I mean, this is what I'm talking about with brain fog. I said, please forgive me, Lord, for saying this. But the one thing with COVID-19 exposed a lot of really stupid people.
Absolutely. Yep.
I knew there were stupid people amongst us. I knew it, but I did not know how many stupid people were among us until that came about. And they all vote.
Yep. And I mean, honestly, I feel like it's just going to get worse too as we move through. Because I really do believe we're in a new age of tyranny, and that was like my subtitle for my first book, "Welcome to the New Age of Tyranny." And I truly believe we have entered this age where it's gonna last. I mean, at a minimum, a decade. There's no voting our way out of it. Tyranny is just going to progress further and further. Trump and Musk are implementing Agenda 2030 and ushering in the Great Reset. And a lot of people say, oh, no, they've defeated them because like Alex Jones, like last week posted something that the World Economic Forum and, the Great Reset got defeated. And I'm like, but that's not true. Trump and Musk are actually implementing it because it's all around AI. It's all about resetting what government is and handing it over to corporations to manage society as a whole. And so we're going to start moving towards that, and AI is going to be a huge thing. And that's where like Doge, this thing that Trump stood up for Musk to run, all of the money that they're supposedly finding and saving, they're not actually saving anything. They might cancel a contract here and there, but the money has already been budgeted for and spent.
Yeah.
It's already line item. They're not giving it back to the public. They're not putting it towards national debt.
Yeah.
They're diverting those funds to what? And really, it's because they're implementing AI on the back end on all of these different things. So really, government is going to become much more efficient. And since government is tyrannical by its very nature, it's just going to make tyranny efficient. And it's going to be in line with World Economic Forum's push for a global surveillance state. It's about to get real rough for a lot of people, and just people don't see it.
They're very good at keeping people afraid, and they can use fear as a tactic to keep people submissive.
Absolutely.
They can use fear to keep people obedient. Maybe not even so much submissive, but it's obedient.
Yep. It's all about the psychological operations. Like I have an entire chapter on it, and we'll get into that. But I go into detail on all the different levels that they attack everyone at. And if you're unaware of that, it just seeps in, and it causes a psychological effect so that you struggle at trying to make real informed decisions, making you easier to control and manipulate.
Well, we've already talked about a little bit leading into all this with the critical thinking, but I want to start there with your book. It's the very first chapter in the book, and I think that's interesting that you started the book off with critical thinking, and he's called it a simplified breakdown. But I want to read this Chomsky quote because I think it's fantastic to kind of lead into this, and I want you to talk more about how critical thinking is not taught in schools, in public schools, which we know why it's not taught in public schools. But I think it's interesting that people don't realize that, because it's sorely needed right now for people to start thinking for themselves. And I am of the belief that if people actually started thinking for themselves, that everything that you just described goes away.
Yep. And that's really about my second book is all about that we need to evolve, not revolve.
Right.
Because, and we'll get into that in this next chapter. So let's talk about critical thinking first.
All right. Let me read this Chomsky quote. It's a little long, but I loved it. It says, "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissonant views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate." Noam Chomsky.
Yep.
And I love that quote because I don't know if you can get more accurate about what we're seeing right now, what we're seeing today.
Absolutely. And it's all about how critical thinking has actually been purposely removed out of government education. And we've now had generations upon generations of people that were raised under government indoctrination that basically limits the ability to actually critically think as a skill set. People might have an innate ability to analyze things or to potentially think through things, but most people don't understand that it's actually a process, a repeatable process, and it's simple. There's just three pillars. It's grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and you have to go in order. Grammar is our systematic body of knowledge. It's where we gather all factual evidence, anecdotal evidence, objective truths, subjective truths, our root definitions, the pure grammar stuff of like, what does a word mean, the themes and context behind it, because words change or people use them incorrectly all the time. So when someone says something but it means 5 different things to 5 different people, how are you actually effectively communicating? And so that's what grammar is all about, is that the input process of this whole flow. Then you move on to logic, and logic is all about removing inherent contradictions, your cognitive biases, and you have to look at yourself first. You have to really go, am I looking at this correctly, or am I committing some type of fallacy here? And after you remove all of that, you then remove it from other people's rhetoric and information that they're providing you. And so logic is your processing pillar. Anytime you're provided new information that might go against something that you believe or you think is true, you have to start back at grammar and then go through the motions on, does it actually change my view and perspective, or is it incorrect because what they provided you is actually not true? Because you can get information all the time from, like, say, a published study. And a published study might say, they might make the determination and a causation of, X, Y, and Z. But when you look at it, they're paid by Pfizer. So they have a financial incentive to push a study that way versus telling what could be the truth. So then after logic, you then move into rhetoric, and rhetoric is all about actionable intelligence, a simplified a breakdown of all the information you gathered in grammar and the processing you did in logic. And so I have an actual definition of how I view critical thinking. Critical thinking is skillfully defining, intellectualizing, analyzing, and evaluating data and information gathered from all sources and producing belief and action in rhetoric that provides clarity and consistency through evidence and reason. And our public education system is actually comprised of the classical trivium, which the Catholic Church really used to keep people enclosed in their doctrine and the doctrine of the Catholic Church. And anytime you try to step out of it, you get your hand slapped and you get reforced back into that doctrine. But you can talk about it as much as you want, like Chomsky was talking about, that inside that body of knowledge, yeah, you can have a lively debate, but you can't step outside of it. And you see a lot of that in universities and higher education, including in the K through 12 education as well. So you have the classical trivium that really creates literacy slaves that are smart enough to work, but not smart enough to think for themselves. Another model that the U.S. picked up was the Prussian education system. The Prussian education system was designed by the Prussians after their military and mercenaries lost against Napoleon. And their parliament decided and determined that it was because soldiers were thinking for themselves. So they created this whole entire process to create blind obedience and authority with a focus on nation building. And you see that in the U.S. because we actually, in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, incorporated the Prussian education system into the federal standard of it. So now you have these two systems creating literacy slaves and blind obedience. And now you've had generations upon generations being taught with that. This is why there's no real critical thinking going on in public education. They might glance over stuff, but they tell you how to think. They tell you what to do, and they tell you the rhetoric. And then that's what you got to repeat. It's not about finding out the truth for yourself. And so all of my work, I always talk about critical thinking as the very first thing. Just to get the path sets, because everyone has the ability to learn this as a skill set, but it's a repeated process. You have to like devote yourself to it. You have to think about it. You have to have metacognition, which is the thinking about thinking. It's you have to think about the process as you're doing it, not just inherently and innately do it. And that's really what this whole first chapter is just discussing what critical thinking is, the different pillars and how to work within them, and then moving on to the rest of the book.
Now, and I can't remember where I read this. Maybe it was your book. I don't know. But wasn't the education system designed to just create more factory workers? I don't remember where I read this.
Yeah, I mean, it's close to what I was saying is the classical trivium, where making people smart enough to work, but not smart enough to think for themselves. And that's close to the same thing. That's part of that classical trivium piece.
And I don't have any kids of my own. If I did, I would not have them in public schools. Knowing what I know today, now back in the day, I wouldn't have even thought twice about it. I've even talked to people too that it's almost like they treat the school system as like a babysitter for their kids while they go to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I mean, you can find some good schools that, for the most part, it's good, but they still have that statist aspect of it. So you can still work with kids. I mean, like I have 5 kids, and some of them, they actually jumped back into high school, but for 3 of them, pretty much all of their middle school, we homeschool, especially during COVID. Once COVID hit, I pulled all of my kids out of school and was like, no, you're not going into school for any of that. No masks, no nothing. And I think I made the right decision, but they wanted to get back in and doing like school sports and stuff. And so I let them go back to high school.
I mean, it makes sense. Kids want to be kids too. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, it's hitting teenagers, hanging out with more teenagers. So I get it. But I think I've taught them well enough to
they can think for themselves.
Exactly. And I'm there to watch, any stuff they bring home or they discuss and do at school. I try to maintain and at least look out for and kind of help them through it and figure stuff out on their own. But you only do what you can only do.
Yeah. Not only do we have indoctrination camps in the public school systems, now we have a concentration camp set up in El Salvador, which is neat to watch.
Yeah. That was interesting to see, and I'm like, but I know that some people are they kind of forget that we've already done concentration camps before against the Japanese at one point, and so this is not new, but it is tyranny. I mean, especially the fact that it doesn't matter what your legal status is. If they think that they want to, they just pick you up and send you off. And then they go, oh, we might have made a mistake. Oh, well, we can't get them back. They're already gone.
Yeah.
Like, and so, I mean, it just shows that it's tyrannical. And that is how a police state and tyranny takes hold and grows. And it's because everyone on the right doesn't care. Like, at least most people on the right don't care. They're like, oh, because it's my side doing it. Yeah, like, get those people out of there. And it's because a lot of them are closet bigots or racists or whatever. And now they just find justification into feeling a certain way.
They would throw a fit if Biden was doing this or if Obama was been doing it.
And if Biden did this and was picking people up and sending them off, they would throw a fit. They'd be like, this is tyranny. You're not following the laws and the rules and the Constitution and da-da-da-da. And second their side does it, they're like, oh, no, this is fine. Yeah.
This reminds me of that meme where that dog sitting around with everything's on fire around him and he's saying, this is fine.
That's fine. That's fine.
It's fine. No big deal. It's so strange to me to watch folks go down that route and just gloss over what's happening because their team is in power. And they act like it couldn't happen to them. I mean, we're seeing quote unquote legal citizens. I hate even saying that, quote unquote legal citizens being deported into this prison.
Yeah.
Because they don't, I don't get it, man.
And then they listen to these alternative news or other places where people are saying, oh no, they were criminals or gang members. And then, but you have like lawyers who then talk to the judges and go, actually, they should never have gone. We don't see any criminal thing. It was a mistake. I don't know why they were sent. And then they get suspended because they didn't, back the government on it and told that to a judge. And so it's those things. And it's like, well, where do you draw the line? How do you know what's true? Are they really gang members or not? Did they really commit a violent crime? Or were they gang member, 10 years ago, left, came here and haven't done anything since and have been a model citizen? But you're just going to get picked up and shipped back just because people just don't think it through.
What was the guy's name? It was one of Trump's czars, quote unquote czars. And he said that anybody questioning the due process was one person could be viewed as aiding and abetting a terrorist.
Yeah.
And can be subject to federal charges. And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? We've seen this before, haven't we? And we've seen it before in Germany. And then just the other day, I read that Trump had some judge arrested for helping an immigrant out. I'm like,
yeah, they said, hey, ICE is looking for you, and said you got to hide. And I guess they found out that that's what the judge did, or informed them that ICE was looking for him. So they arrested the judge. And that's one of the articles I talk about, and I do a weekly article and music to go with it. And that's one of the topics I covered this week, which will be out later today.
It's madness out there, man. And it's so strange to watch.
It is. But it's interesting how the similarities between Nazi Germany and now is very true. And it's very apparent. And it's because, as we talked about, the Prussian education system, well, the Prussians turned into Germany, which turned into Nazi Germany. So creating blind obedience and authority leads to tyrannical actions and tyranny. And I've been saying this for a while, and a lot of people don't believe me. I mean, Trump was a Democrat all the way up until 2015 when he switched over to becoming a Republican as he started to run.
Yeah.
He's a National Socialist.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the Nazis were. He's not a Nazi, but he is a National Socialist. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so we're gearing towards this new age of tyranny, but he is all part of the World Economic Forum push and everything. Regardless of what he says, his actions show that is the path we're going, and there's no stopping it, no voting it out. Any chance of actually fighting back was gone maybe a decade ago. I mean, you had the Bundy family or whatever they were that, stood up against Obama and, fought back and whatnot. And now that type of mentality is just completely gone because you have everyone going, well, no, Trump's got our back.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do it, because the only ones that really would have fought back was the people on the right. The people on their left, they're not going to fight back. They're already entrenched. They just want their flavor of tyranny.
Right. I
mean, the right's the same way, but if it was Obama or Biden again, you had that ability. And honestly, I think that's why January 6th, then I use quotes, the insurrection that happened, is because they wanted to paint everyone in there and get everyone scared so that no one would actually stand up. And I mean, hell, most of those militant groups were all being run by FBI informants.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the government running and maintaining those things and setting people up. And it's just, people don't see it. And they still think that their vote matters and they can, vote their way out of this tyranny that we're starting to face, not realizing that the cage has already been placed around them.
All right. I want to say one more thing and then we'll move on to chapter 2, the life cycle of government. I like this chapter a lot. But you said something about them being racist or bigots. And I've always been very hesitant to use the word racist because I think it's used out of context a lot. I think it's used without the proper definition. But the more I've watched this go down, I do believe that Trump is a racist.
Yeah.
And I think that his supporters, whether they know they're racist or not, they've taken on his identity and they are low-key racist with the way they're behaving.
Yeah.
Whether they understand it or not. And listen, I say that knowing I having a lot of friends and family who support this man. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think that any of my family have a racist bone in their body, but if they're going to take on this mentality, maybe they don't realize that they're behaving like a racist. Because if you take the definition literally, what it says, it means that basically you think that you are superior to another person.
And honestly, and race is actually any physical description. So blue-eyed people is a race that you could say, and you could do it by skin color, by eye color. You could do it by any number of different characteristics, and you could call that a race. Redhead, redheads, things like that. So the idea of to hate someone based on these arbitrary things is stupid. But that's really what it is. Yeah. And most people just assume that it's based on skin color or something like that, when it's not.
Hey folks, do you like salsa? I love salsa. I have come up with a fire recipe, and we have been shipping this homemade salsa all across the country. If you like salsa and want a cool way to support the project and spread the message of no king but Christ, then holler at us. You can reach us at badromansalsa@gmail.com or visit the official Bad Roman Salsa Facebook page and message us there. Thank y'all so much for your continued support. Now let's get back to the show. All right, let's jump down to chapter 2, the life cycle of governments. Now, you talked about Plato's 5 regimes.
Absolutely.
Aristocracy. I don't think I'm saying that correctly.
It's all right.
To timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. Let's start with the first one that I cannot pronounce, aristocracy. Maybe you can pronounce it better. I know you can pronounce it better than
I'm awful at pronouncing things too, so it's all right.
I got in quotes, it's the rule of the wise. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that's something we don't hear this very often.
Yeah, and it's all about being ruled by what Plato called philosopher kings, people who are educated in critical thinking, the ways of ethics, morality, people who are like truly do care. And the problem is that even though you might have a true philosopher king, someone in that position of power ruling over people with a not a heavy hand, but actually caring about it and understanding all these different aspects. But once they're gone, their children are not the same person. They're whoever they allow to take over, whoever gets voted in next. These are not the same people. And so things start to change and unwind really quickly. But the biggest thing that people need to remember is that Plato is explaining a life cycle of government. Government is not static. A lot of people love to say that the U.S. is a constitutional republic. Even though we might have started out where we were closer to a constitutional republic and actually different things like democracy and other things actually all combined into it. We were like a hybrid, so to speak. But it doesn't matter how we start out. It constantly moves forward towards tyranny. So after democracy comes tyranny. That is how it's been. That's how it's been for thousands of years. And that's how it will always be, because the true nature of government is tyrannical. Or using root definitions and just looking at the word government itself, it's a tool or action of control over the innocent. And I always classify that over the innocent is why it makes it tyrannical, because that if you're being controlled and you haven't committed a crime, created a victim, then your rights are being violated.
Yeah.
Your right to life, freedom, property, those natural rights that everyone around the world, all humanity has inherently, those get violated if you're being controlled by some other force, regardless if it's a philosopher king or a tyrant. It doesn't matter, because you're being controlled when you shouldn't be. Adults shouldn't be controlled. Now, as an anarchist, that's just the absence of government, where you don't believe in rulers. You can have leaders, you can have principles, you can have rules, but you don't have rulers. And so and my whole book clearly defines what both are and getting into it. And that's really, I focus more on anarchism in that last chapter.
Yeah, we're definitely going to touch on that at the end.
But after tyranny comes revolution. And then after revolution, it just starts back over, because that's what revolution means. It's just the act of revolving. And that means you're just moving back to an earlier form of statism, and the whole thing plays out again. Now, a lot of people say, hey, my idea of government X or this flavor of government is the best thing or whatnot, but it doesn't matter, because the life cycle holds true that it always ends in tyranny. So there has to be another way. Humanity has to evolve past this need of being controlled, or we'll never get out of this endless cycle. I mean, and the idiom of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Right.
Where you don't see different results. And so that's what this whole chapter is all about, is describing that life cycle and showing people that we're actually in the end stages of government. the late stage government, which is tyranny. And regardless of how it looks or the flavor, I mean, some people are going to get it more than others, but it's definitely there, and it's going to affect everyone as a whole.
Right. Let's talk about democracy. That's a new one for me. I've not heard of this.
Yeah.
It's the rule of the honorable.
Yeah. And it's all about just, pursuing honor, military achievement, where it replaces virtue and wisdom as the central tenets of government. So it's more about that military aspect. It departs from the intellectual and moral characteristics and focuses more on like social values or, discipline, courage, patriotism. So you see that a lot within the U.S. is, like I said, the U.S. is really a hybrid of all of these. And Plato came up with this, thousands of years ago. So clearly things have progressed beyond that. But he even saw this cycle repeated over and over, even back then. And I have no idea how many hundreds of years or even 1,000 years of evidence that he pulled from to actually see this pattern and actually to be able to identify that there really is a life cycle to it. And I like the patriotism is one of there's terrorism and patriotism are like my two favorite words to bring up to people and discuss. So like patriotism, a lot of people had that idea of it's flag waving, supporting your country. You might not like your government, but you can support your country and that, your flag. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that the U.S. flag, it actually represents the government. When I was in the military, we wore that on our shoulders, and it was to represent the U.S. government and go into battle with it. Anytime a government is overthrown and changes, what do they create? A new coat of arms, which is the flag. Patriotism, its root definition is actually fellow countrymen, and a country is a landmass controlled by a government. So if you're a fellow countryman and you love your country, you also love your government. The problem is that if you take it into context of when patriotism, a lot of people like to view our founding fathers as patriots. Well, were they patriots and fellow countrymen of the redcoats because they didn't have their independence yet? No, they weren't redcoats because that's what patriots were at the time, were redcoats. So you have to look at it deeper. And in the 18th century, patriot also meant a factious disturber of the government. That's what our founders were. They were factious disturbers of a tyrannical government, the redcoats, the British government. And so when a lot of people, wave the flag and call themselves patriots, it's like you're not using the term correctly. You're actually describing yourself as a redcoat, not one of our founders. And so that's why I love, diving into and using the trivia method of critical thinking and going through this process of jumping back to grammar, because it's taught me these type of things and shown me really in the context of how it was used with our founders is not how people use it today.
Yeah.
And so, but again, patriotism more falls in the line with like the Prussians, where it's blind obedience towards authority, but they leverage that desire to be flag wavers to do it.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that about the flag too, because that's what I've tried to explain to folks. Like it's
a coat of arms,
right? Well, as far as as my faith goes, I've stated this over and over on the show recently, and in the past a little bit too. But I no longer will stand when the songs are being sang. I won't pledge allegiance. I'll stay seated. I did it at a very large venue at a Memphis Grizzlies basketball game.
I do that all
last year before last, whenever it was. Felt the heat on my neck. I've talked about the story. No need to rehash it. But when I talk about that, like your normie, quote unquote, normie types, they said, well, we don't, and it's exactly what you said. Well, we're not pledging allegiance to the government. We're pledging allegiance to our country, our countrymen and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, that flag represents the United States government, and you're pledging allegiance to a government.
Absolutely.
And we, like you said, being in the military, and this is something that I've tried to point out too, everybody over there that is being slaughtered by the United States government sees that flag on the soldiers uniform.
Yep.
And so they equate the two as
one.
Yeah.
And it is. And again, when a government is overthrown, that's one of the first things is they establish a new flag, because that is what represents the new government.
Yeah.
And that's because that's what the flag is. That is a representation of said government.
All right, let's go through these last three real quick. But the oligarchy, I find this funny because I don't know if you've seen it. You probably have seen this. Bernie Sanders and AOC running around talking about we're heading into an oligarchy. I'm like, wait a second, we've already been there. We're already there. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why he sucks, but he's not wrong. It is part of an oligarchy because again, that's part of the Great Reset is moving away from government and putting it back into industry titans who are going to then manage society's norms and things like that. And so it's not necessarily wrong that he's saying it, but how his context and how he pushes it is wrong. We were already there.
Yes.
The same thing with democracy, which is the next step, which is all about freedom. Now, interesting enough is Plato, Aristotle, they view democracy as one of the greatest things about freedom because it provides equal, and I do quotes, equal voices for people. But really, when you look at it, it's the majority making slaves out of the minority.
Yeah.
In a true democracy, 51% versus 49%, that you can do a lot, especially within government, and you're controlling people. So really, it's the majority makes slaves out of the minority. However, the majority usually don't vote, and they're being manipulated by a select few who then use democracy and under the guise of democracy to initiate control and maintain control. Now, one thing that Plato and Aristotle viewed is that on the pendulum, just thinking of like a pendulum going back and forth. If the greater the amount of freedom you might have obtained, the greater the amount of tyranny that comes next. And if you look at the US was definitely one of the greatest in the history of, or at least up there in the top for like 5 of greatest places of dealing with freedom. And at least initially in the idea of freedom and trying to put it into the Constitution and, build that identity. So if that was one pendulum swing, what we're about to face is going to be significant tyranny that matches that level of freedom that came with it. And a lot of people don't understand the life cycle of government, and they don't see that's what's coming just based on how these patterns play out.
Yeah, and since we went over democracy, I find democracy so funny too because you mentioned a constitutional republic earlier. It was something I would say a lot when I was back in my Constitution studying days and the founding and stuff. And now when you watch any of these mainstream or corporate media types, they say democracy all the time, like during election cycles, democracy 2024, and all this stuff, and nobody even questions it anymore. It's so ingrained in people's mind that, we're a democracy. When we weren't started, the country was not founded as a democracy or wasn't supposed to have been. Was it Benjamin Franklin that said when they got out of the meetings and the lady said, what did y'all come up with? I'm paraphrasing. He said a constitutional republic if you can keep it.
Yeah. And you can't, that's because that's not how government works.
Yeah. All right, so with tyranny, and it's the rule of the one, and I think we're seeing that so much with Trump, and I'm not saying that Biden was any different or Obama, you know what I'm saying, but he wants to be king.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's already floating the idea of a third term, and there's a lot of people already backing it, and I'm like, but it just plays into all of this that it's just we're entering this new age of tyranny, but like I said, it's not just our country, it's all countries, it's the globe that we're entering in. And that's the difference from generations past, that this tyranny is on a whole nother level, not just on country.
I remember somebody told me once it was on one of our shows, maybe, or I don't know. I do so many podcasts, I can't remember if I'm on theirs or on mine. But anyway, he said, well, I just hope Trump wins this time so we can finally be rid of him. And I'm thinking, I don't think we're ever getting rid of this guy until he dies.
Or then he hands it down to his kid or whatnot. I mean,
it seems like he's setting up something like that. I mean,
right. And even if he doesn't, whoever is going to be next is going to be worse. So even if it's handed to like Kamala or one of the Obama girls, or I know all these different things that people have floated around over the years on what could come next, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be worse. Trump, and I call it Trump 1.0 was really Obama 3.0.
Yeah.
And Trump 2.0 is really, or I call him, Trump 2.0. He is more tyrannical this time than he was his first time, and again, like even like it was spending and things like that. He carried over Biden's spending bill and their push for him from the administration. So he took over and was like, yeah, let's continue spending stuff. Whatever.
They're the same freaking person.
And he could have easily vetoed it. and done stuff to prove that he was really on the side of the taxpayers and the country, but he's not. He's definitely Israeli first and citizens last.
Yeah. I was listening to the Jimmy Dore podcast here a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you've ever listened to him or not. I don't listen to him a lot, but I heard something about him. I pulled it up and listened. He was talking about Trump, and he kept saying that Trump he's not running for re-election. So he's got a short amount of time to do this. And the more I was listening to him talk, the more I kept thinking, I think that makes him more dangerous.
He has nothing to lose then.
He has nothing to lose. And then this guy that likes to troll my post on Facebook when I say anything about Trump, I remember, and I told him this, I said, you told me one time that you don't think that Trump is who I think he is. And I told him, I came back, a couple weeks ago to him. I was like, I repeated that to him, and I said, I think you're right. I think he's much worse than I thought he was.
Yeah.
I really do that. This guy is a dangerous man.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, I think it was all Biden was just a setup to allow Trump to win as we get into this next stage, to allow for the bird flu vaccine to get pushed.
It's all theater, folks.
Now you have RFK Jr. in charge of it, and RFK Jr. pro-vaccines. He was pro-lockdown, COVID-19 lockdowns, because they helped out the environment. And, he's tying all this stuff to like gun control, to like mental health. He supports that type of thing. Like he's a full-blown leftist.
Yeah.
And a lot of people back him just because he says, oh, we need to space out vaccines. Or the idea, now he just started the registry to track people that have autism. And I'm like, we don't need a government tracking people.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
It's so stupid.
He's a maniac. He's a maniac.
Yeah.
The whole thing is crazy to watch.
Right.
And I think Larkin Rose said something one time, and I'm paraphrasing, he's talking about, he goes, I'm not worried about the guy with the funny mustache. It's the people who are supporting the guy with a funny mustache that we need to worry about. And there's a lot of them.
There is.
When you said it correctly earlier too, that the majority of the people don't vote. And even more so this election, there was more people that did not vote than people who actually voted for Trump. They kept saying it was a landslide.
But it was a landslide within just the small group of people who did vote.
Yeah.
And then who knows if those were even legitimate, which I thought was very funny because I talk about it in my conspiracy theory chapter, voting fraud. And I go through all the years going back, starting in 2012 when they screwed over Ron Paul and basically handed the nomination to Romney. And that was my first, and I wasn't an anarchist, I was a libertarian at the time. And that was my first indication. I'm like, oh, GOP is completely corrupt. There's no fixing that. They just handed controlled opposition as your only choice. And I'm like, so that's not a real choice. Fast forward to 2016, and what did we get? DNC handed the nomination over to Clinton when it probably should have went to Sanders. Regardless of how much you dislike or like him, he really probably should have been. He had the grassroots movements, just like kind of like Ron Paul did. But they handed it over to Clinton. And then, of course, they then just focus on Trump and Clinton as the only two options, basically giving Trump the win.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, but since 2016, I've been saying that Trump's a honeypot. He's a trap. And nothing has changed my mind.
I was going to say that he's the perfect psyop on the right.
Yep.
Because he is a New York liberal. He always has been. He still is.
Yep.
He just got an R by his name. And that's a great segue into chapter 8, psychological operations. But I want to pause for a second, and then we'll get into psyops.
Hey folks, we have set up a very simple way to donate to the Bad Roman Project through spotfund.com. Just go to SpotFund and search No King But Christ. This has become necessary to continue to provide a quality podcast and keep production costs down as well. Just $5 or $10 a month will go a long way in helping us keep this project going and continue spreading the very basic message of No King But Christ. So if you like what we were doing and can find it within your budget, go to spotfund.com and search No King But Christ, and you can set up monthly donations or even donate one time. Any and all donations help more than you know, and as always, any donations above production costs will go directly to charities in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank y'all so much. Now back to the show.
All right, down to chapter 8, psychological operations. And this is always a fun topic for me It's something that, and I don't know, actually, I'm pretty sure you have experience when you talk about this stuff. You're immediately considered a nut job or a conspiracy theorist or something, but there is documentation of these actual psyops.
Oh yeah. And I cover a bunch of them, including in my conspiracy theory chapter. I go through all of these different operations and stuff like that. But it's quite amazing how ingrained the psychological operations machine is, even just within the U.S. society, that people don't see. And like I said, we read a quote earlier, but all of my chapters start and end with quotes. Just something I like to do, just provides a little bit of more clarity in other contexts. So this chapter actually starts with a quote from the Psychological Warfare Casebook from the Operations Research Office at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And they said, and this is from 1958, if you give a man the correct information for 7 years, he may believe the incorrect information on the first day of the 8th year when it is necessary. From your point of view, that he should do so. Your first job is to build the credibility and authenticity of your propaganda and persuade the enemy to trust you, although you are his enemy. And it shows that, more than 50 years now, we're talking closer to 70 years. That's been the mentality of how psychological operations function. And it's all about, it doesn't matter how much truth they give you, they will tell you everything in truth. They will scream all of the truth that you believe just so that you follow them, and then they lead you down the wrong path when it's necessary. That's how Trump got elected, or in 2015, if you go back and see his campaign speeches and things he talked about, he said vaccines were bad, that they caused autism. He talked about all of these different conspiracies. He got into it. He played a lot of people. But then when he actually got into office, he fell back from all of that rhetoric. And it just shows that he is a psychological operations, and it was all scripted to convince people to put their trust in him and not fight back. They really believe he's some billionaire Batman savior that is going to take on these globalists. And I'm like,
yeah,
they killed JFK. They assassinate people. They have heart attack guns. They have all of these different ways to take people out, make them believe by suicide, accidents, things like that. You're telling me they can't take him out?
Yeah.
They take out, the CIA overthrows governments all the time. They take out and they assassinate people all the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's not hard. I always say, and I use that loosely, not hard, but because they do it all the time, to do that. Trump was never in danger. That's because he's playing everyone and he's part of the game. The only reason that they would actually take him out is if it actually played towards a bigger step on, hey, because we took him out, we can now push this bill forward that really clamps down on control.
Do you, let me ask you this, and do you think the assassination attempt was a psyop?
Yes. For the whole ear thing that he was magically shot in, and I love the simulation where they're like, one bullet just whizzed past his head, and if he didn't turn his head at the last second, it would have clipped him, and killed him, and and they show multiple bullets going the exact same trajectory, and I'm like, that's not how bullets work. It doesn't matter if you don't even move and you shoot, unless you are a really good trained shooter, and even then the bullets change. It's hard to get the exact same flight path. I don't even think his ear was shot, because when you look at his ear after the fact, you don't see a hole. There's no 5.56 round that went through his ear. There should be damage, and it should be noticeable. And his explanation for it was, I heal fast. Come on.
All right, Antichrist.
Right? And I feel like I don't even think he's the Antichrist. I think it's going to be something else. Whole process.
Well, I think they all are. If you take the definition of Antichrist, everybody that is in government is Antichrist, because they're that just means they're in place of or other than Jesus. So they are all Antichrist.
That's
anyway.
Yep.
But what do you say to folks who during that assassination, quote unquote assassination attempt, about the fireman who got killed protecting his family?
Oh. We have no problem killing real people.
Right. That's exactly what I was fixing to say. They don't have a problem killing anybody.
Nope.
Just to get their agenda pushed.
He just wasn't the target. And honestly, the guy on the roof,
Yeah.
he was just the patsy. I don't even think he shot. I believe the real shooter wasn't someone on the tower, but was underneath that, the one on the roof in cover. So you actually didn't even see the actual shooter. There's no video of it because he was uncover in the dark in the building with the window. And then, after a couple shots, then they shoot the guy on the roof. And look, problem solved. He was the would-be assassin, and he just failed. From that distance, if you've practiced at all with an M4 or AR-15, any type of rifle, where he should have been able to hit, if you've had any type of training, hit Trump. And to get that close where you just shot his ear, like, I don't believe it. And the fact how the Secret Service, it wasn't Trump's original Secret Service, it was a group of different people, how they treated him. He was on stage and then they just kind of shielded him. And I'm like, that's not how that works. You get him off the stage, you rush. You don't let him sit there and pump his fist in the air with, some blood on his ears. You don't do a photo op. You don't stop to grab his shoe off the ground when he's like, hey, can you grab my shoe? You don't slowly whisk him away into a vehicle and then pause there. It is a running and sprinting, and you are dragging him because your responsibility is get him out of there. Regardless of what he wants to say, you drag him, throw him in the car, and go. That is the protocol, and they didn't follow it at all. And so the whole thing screamed WWE, and which I think is funny is that then he made Linda McMahon as the education secretary or something of the education department, gave her a position for that. And I just thought it was interesting because he's a wrestler. He's done WWE stuff like that. The whole assassination thing screamed a WWE production.
Yeah, and it worked because I know
it worked. Absolutely.
I know people who may have never voted decided to go and vote because they thought that was so quote unquote patriotic of him to stand up and say fight, fight, fight with his ear bleeding.
And that's why they did.
And I'm not dismissing the fact that somebody did actually die, but like we said earlier, they don't have a problem killing anybody.
Yeah.
But when I saw it, when I heard about it, and then I saw it, I'm like, man, this looks really freaking fishy to me. But you don't know how to come out and say something like that without sounding like a complete lunatic. I'm like, that seemed very staged, with him telling them to let me stand up and basically
it did
rile everybody up. I mean, it seems so. Anyway,
and that where it comes back to playing where people don't know how to critically think, because then you really someone who's truly critically thinking and going through those motions, the grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Well, you go, okay, well, what is a false flag? Would they fake an assassination attempt? Absolutely. Would they stage this? Absolutely. So you can't discount any of that. So what is true? Yes, someone did die. Okay, but was Trump actually shot? Well, look at his ear. I'm sorry, if you put a round through his ear, it's not going to magically stitch back together and not have like a huge scar. Like it's crazy how much people just assume because they saw some blood and some round going off.
Did you see the memes? That came out? There was one of him with a tiny hand holding a ketchup package to his ear. It was hilarious. But did you also see whenever they would, like the Republican National Convention, some of his cult members in the crowd was wearing bandages on their ears?
Oh, had the pads on his ear. Yep. And that's how you sell. I mean, and that's all psychological operations. That's how you sell all of that stuff. I mean, and so in my Psyops chapter, I talk about what terrorism is and now how the root definition is actually government intimidation,
right?
Not and just intimidating people in general, but it actually was coined during the French Revolution during their reign of terror. And so terrorism actually is really about government committing atrocities against their people and other. And that's what terrorism is. So like the US government in that context is the world's largest terrorist organization, based on what we've been doing for over 100 years plus. But getting into I talk about propaganda and how that the government, that they passed the law, when Obama was still in, allowing that they could spend taxpayer money to create and generate propaganda that is geared towards the US citizens. So that right there, just this huge government. And remember when Biden tried to do their disinformation governance board? all screaming 1984. Luckily, they disbanded that real quick, but I think that was just more of a test on trying to get the gauge of where people really were. I go into, disinformation, mainstream media, their fake news, the concept of where the term fake news came from, how they push it and how they spin, where they can say, hey, what you're saying is just fake news. You're not a real journalist. You're not a real news organization. Just listen to us, even though mainstream media is constantly getting pegged with pushing fake narratives that benefit the government in some way. Mass psychosis is another one. We talked about, how government exploits fear, and it is a deep psychological state that you get people's adrenaline and other chemicals in their body jacked up and moving constantly, so that it creates this brain fog. And so that fear plays into it. And one thing I've noticed now coming up, and now going back to where I think there's a bird flu pandemic coming, right before COVID-19 happened, most people don't remember it because COVID-19 fogs them. But right before that happened, there was that whole measles scare where measles was going around. It was going to kill everyone and make sure you get vaccinated and all this other stuff. And then all of a sudden it kind of fizzled out and went away. And then bam, COVID-19 happened. What's going on right now? A huge measles scare. And even, RFK Jr. came out and said, oh, the best way to protect yourself from measles is to get vaccinated. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's to know your body and your terrain and figure out why you're catching it and why you might have severities, and what things like high doses of vitamin A and vitamin C are critical in fighting the severity of measles. But most people don't look at that or go through it, and then you just have to, deal with it.
What I've noticed too, when they're talking about the measles in Texas and the outbreak, quote unquote outbreak, I don't even think it's an outbreak. I think it's just a few people. But anyway, I've noticed a lot of people really being like, I don't know, man, we saw this garbage back in 2020. And I remember when all that happened back in 2020, I remember saying on another show that I really think they screwed this up because it's going to wake a lot more people up than they realize.
I don't think it will wake people up. Maybe some people, but again, they have that belief in government as a whole that they can fix it, so it doesn't fully wake them up.
Well, maybe I've successfully created my own echo chamber on social media then.
I mean, and it's possible. I mean, but it's just interesting because again, some people they fall into that. Oh, but think of the children, and which is a logical fallacy by trying to do an emotional appeal. And it plays into that. And I think it just keeps people in repetition fear because they go, that repetition, fear, and people start feeling it. And then you give it a little bit more and all of a sudden you run into now it's a bird flu. And then bam, now the fear really ramps up.
All right. I'm going to try and blend these last two together. We're a little over an hour now because I want to get into chapter 10 and talk about anarchism a little bit, because what I was going to do at the end is ask you, is there any hope? But I think that when I ask that question, I think we can dive into what anarchism is, because I do believe that an anarchist mentality or just moving towards that is our hope.
Yeah.
Now, as a Christian, I believe my hope is in Jesus, obviously, but I also believe that the early church operated like a bunch of anarchists too. So if we can get back to that way of thinking. Now, I want to read this Edward Abbey quote that you start this chapter off with. It's and I've seen this quote 100 times. I love this quote, but I want to read it, so for the listeners, for some context, and if anybody hasn't heard it. But it says, "Anarchism is not a romantic fable, but the hard-headed realization based on 5,000 years of experience that we cannot entrust the management of our lives to kings, priests, politicians, generals, and county commissioners."
Yep.
And it is that is, I think that's how a lot of us became anarchists, we realized we were born an anarchist, and then along the way we got muddied with a bunch of garbage.
Theism. Yep.
So let's talk about that. You said anarchism is not a monolith. It encompasses diverse schools of thought. Anarchy upholds voluntary interactions. Now, this is interesting to me because it's something that I get really frustrated with anarchists as well. And people have heard me talk about it on the show, because when I first became an anarchist and started understanding the philosophy, I was like, finally, I have found the most principled stance I can have when it comes to my view, when it comes to government and politics and stuff like that. the longer I was an anarchist, the more I got into these circles, the more I was speaking to people. It doesn't mean the same thing to a lot of people. And so
Exactly.
then I started backing off of using it. I still believe I'm an anarchist, but if it's not consistent, if the messaging isn't consistent, then I lose
people just by talking about it.
It bothers me. I'm a black and white thinker, no gray area for me. So if it's losing its consistency,
Yeah.
I disengage because I need consistency. I need it to be the same way over and over. So I've talked to anarchists who voted for Trump. I've talked to anarchists who are running for political office, and I'm like, this is not anarchy.
No, it's statism.
But it's their flavor of anarchy, and I'm like, but that's
minarchist at a minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, and I get that, and that's why I talk about definitions so much and how the government is just a tool or action of control at its root. And anarchism is a system or practice of no rulers, voluntary action, and absence of government over the innocent based on natural rights, life, freedom, and property. That is the most succinct definition I can provide of what anarchy is, and that there's no middle ground, like you were saying. It's either statism or it's not. There's not a middle ground, because it's just, even minarchism, it's statism in the least amount of form, but because of statism and government's life cycle, it eventually will reach tyranny. There's no stopping that. That is just its natural life cycle. So I'm an anarchist. I don't claim any flavor of anarchy per se. I like some or the other, but I think the best systems will be hybrid approaches that pull from various schools of thought. Anarcho-capitalism, anarcho-socialism. And then it's interesting enough is for like anarcho-socialism or anarcho-communism, I've only met maybe 3 real ones where they actually valued property as a natural right, but they wanted to provide and give their property to a commune or a society and be comfortable with it. And so as long as it is a voluntary action and you're not forcing people through force, violence, whatever, that becomes statism. As long as it's anarchy, I'm all for it. I don't care what flavor it is. I don't care how you want to live. You want to live in a commune and give up everything so that everyone can have the same thing. Cool. That's on you.
Yeah.
But you can't force people to do it. You can't keep people there. You have to allow them to leave or come back. Like, that's how it should be. And that's why voluntary action and sediment is so important with around what anarchism is. Now, my chapter is really anarchism with facilitating systems. And what I mean by facilitating systems is different types of technology or processes or things that allow societies to function, communities to function together while still maintaining natural rights, life, freedom, and property. So thinking about property, as a property owner, I want to make sure my identity and my property is maintained to me, and that no one can just show up to some county and be like, nope, this is my property, and just take it over. I mean, and they can do that now with statism, or they can come in and, you know, kill you or something like that. But the idea of facilitating systems is having a database or some process that allows you to maintain these natural rights in a better solution. But it can't be associated with government. Government can't be controlling it. And I like to think of like industry standards. So yeah, if you have health standards for a community and they've determined, hey, you need to follow all these. As a business owner, you cannot follow them, but now you run the risk of, if you kill your clients because you didn't follow proper standards and cleaning standards or things like that, and you get a bunch of people sick and you kill some people, you could be criminally held liable. It wasn't just an accident. You didn't do your due diligence to protect people based on the standards we think are the most important for a business to deal with.
Right.
And so that's where it draws the line of, I think you should have those standards, but they still can't be forced. But then individual runs the risk of being a criminal because they created victims. Because again, you're not a criminal unless you create a victim. And a lot of people they miss that, and they think that whatever you want, like, oh, just because you cross some arbitrary imaginary line, I'm going to define you as a criminal, and now means I can do whatever I want to you because you're a criminal. But that's not how that works. Or it's a fallacious belief by viewing it that way.
Yeah, I've had that conversation so many times about no victim, no crime. and when I think of the first time I heard that, I don't know if I was still kind of teeter on the edge of anarchy or still kind of understanding it. Interesting enough, my study of the founding and all that stuff led me directly into anarchism. When I think back on what I was reading about the founding, but that's neither here nor there. But that's something that people need to consider. If there's not a victim, there's not a crime.
Yep.
And it's something that I've talked about on the show as well. I got a speeding ticket and I got into didn't get an argument with a cop. I don't want to get shot. But I got an argument with somebody else about it. He goes, well, it's the law. And I'm like, where's the victim?
Right.
It was just me and the cop on the road. He was sitting parked. I wasn't heading towards his vehicle. I was doing 30 and a 20. There was no victim. Why am I having to pay a $200 fine for doing 5 miles over the speed limit in my neighborhood?
And based on that example, like really those speed limits should be suggestions like, hey, this is a residential area, so you shouldn't be going over 25 because there's going to be kids.
Right.
So, but if you're speeding 40 and you hit a kid, you've created a victim. You should be viewed as a criminal because you were breaking the suggested speed limit.
Right.
Not that it's not a tool of just stealing money from people, because that's what happened to you when you got a ticket. It was a road pirate coming and taking money from you or forcing you to pay the government. While what it should have happened is, hey, slow down, there's kids.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Yeah.
And go on with your day or something along those lines. And it's all about when a victim is made or created, then you have to figure out just restitutions and the aspect of justice on how do you rebalance when a right of someone, is violated. And again, if you're doing 25 in a 25 and you hit someone because a kid came running out at you, it's just an accident. You were doing your due diligence. You were following the suggested speed limit. You stopped. You didn't keep on going. But if you're doing 40 and hit a kid, you're like, hey, why were you speeding? Oh, okay. Well, guess what? You now have to face potential criminal prosecution because you weren't following the industry standard for that road. And that's really what these facilitating systems is about. And I call it facilitatism, a system and practice of facilitating systems designed to coordinate and help solve problems through voluntary cooperation and exchange. And so like decentralized aspects of decision-making, blockchain technology, all of these things can be used to help facilitate communities and working together. But again, it can't have that flavor of government behind it. It can't be forced. It can't violate rights, or it's statism, and it all leads back to tyranny.
They like to set up these things in the neighborhood. You can tell it's pulled by, it looks like a trailer, but it's got like, it's reading your speed limit as you're passing by. Like if it's a 20 and you're doing 25, it starts flashing lights and stuff. And
yeah.
And I hope that these things have cameras on them, because every time I pass one, I flip it off.
I know most of the time they don't. But I do know some do. Chances are, if it really did have a camera, you'd probably get a ticket in the mail, or someone would reach out to you for it.
Blast me on their police page on Facebook.
Yeah.
These guys flip.
Which actually is interesting is that in Washington State, they just started 2 different programs. One where they now set up speed cameras in construction zones, and you'll automatically get a ticket just for speeding. And basically they track your movement from one point to another and calculate your speed based on the time you show up between the 2 spots. And now you get your ticket. Even if you're 5 miles over, 10 miles over, doesn't matter. You'll get a ticket in the speed zone. And now they're starting a pilot program in a couple spots that it's just on the normal highway. They're saying, you don't get a ticket. You're just going to get a warning in the mail for now. But that's definitely coming. A few more cameras, and now you have to maintain your speed, or you're going to get, hit up with the tickets all the time.
Yeah.
And I drive a little too fast all the time. So
living in Memphis, man, I think I've become more of an aggressive driver than I ever was before.
Oh yeah.
Because you almost have to be living in this area. I got pulled over here 2 or 3 weeks ago. I had to leave my house, go into Memphis, because there's a place, heard about the salsa, and now they're providing me the jars and stuff I need it for at a much cheaper price than what I was getting through Amazon. But anyway, I was leaving the house and I'm just cruising down Highway 64 towards Memphis to go to this place. Then I had to go straight to work from there. And this deputy pulled me over. And I got to a stoplight. He pulled up behind me. His lights were on. I thought maybe he'd go around me. But no, he was just sitting there. And I was like, I think this guy's pulling me over. So I pulled over to the side of the road. It was an older guy. And he was a nice guy. He walked up to the truck, and we were sitting there chatting. And he wanted to know why I was going so fast. I told him that whole story. And about that time, this Corvette pulled by, and they blew it just blew their motor up at him. He turned around and looked at him. I said, I wonder how fast they were going. And he goes, well, they were probably doing the speed limit. They just wanted to get my attention.
Yeah.
And we talked for a few minutes. He goes, Mr. Hargis, he goes, I just need you to slow down. He didn't give me a ticket. He was cool about it and let me go.
Yeah.
Which is very rare. That's the first time that's ever happened to me.
I had it a couple of times. Mostly I was in military uniform if I got let go. But it was, and that was one of the perks of if I was driving along, I would always wear my uniform just in case something like that happened, because I had a better shot of not getting a ticket. But I mean, but if they're having a bad mood, they come up to you with a gun, like they are a threat. And
yeah.
I even in my, one of the chapters, I talk about police and then protect and serve, but the reality of it, and that they actually have, all government agents have no duty to protect and serve. The government doesn't have a duty to protect and serve because they are a tool or an action of control. And so the only ones that they actually have a duty to protect and serve are criminals that they physically restrain, that are in their care, in prisons, jails, things like that. Those are the only ones they have a duty to protect and serve. Everyone else, they can just sit there and watch you die. They don't have to. They maintain the status quo of society as a whole. They do not care about the individual. And so really the job of police is as policy enforcers. They are modern day redcoats. And they are the threat that the founders warned us against, that standing army.
Yeah.
That once you have a standing army, you lose all rights.
Yeah.
And that's what they are. And like I said, as an individual, they might be great and good, but the second they put that uniform on, that they are not. It is the job itself, not always the individual, but always the individual winning that job. You can't trust any of them.
Yeah, I've had that discussion with folks a lot too about well, my brother's a cop and he's a good guy. And I said, outside of his uniform, he may be, but you don't know how he's behaving at work.
One bad day, he pulls a gun. You don't act perfectly in his eyes as a subjective opinion. And you might go, hey, that's not the law. And they're trying to enforce something that really isn't true, because that happens all the time, that they don't know all the laws either, but they have to enforce all the laws, so that they just assume it's in a law.
Yeah.
And they make you, they want something from you, but you're like, but that's not the law. I don't want to do it. And what happens? Death.
Yeah.
Because there's no law too small that the government won't kill over. They will absolutely put anyone down standing up to tyranny. And because that's how, tyranny rolls.
And I've held the belief for a while now, maybe probably since I started waking up, when I started understanding what was going on right before our eyes that I wasn't seeing, is that the state is only there to protect the state, and that's that's what the police are for, to protect a crooked politician. And talking about laws, that's another thing that gets thrown up in my face. Well, it's the law, and I said, well, what if that law is immoral?
Yep.
Just because it's a law does not mean it's moral. Does not mean it's a good law.
Well, I mean, even Jefferson said that the law is nothing but a tyrant's will, or is often nothing but a tyrant's will. And like, you have a duty for your natural rights that you don't submit to bad laws.
100%.
The Congress, doesn't matter right, left, they love adding more laws, because that's how they bill. Well, I was able to pass this law and this, or I put forward all of this legislation. But when the higher up you get, you put forth, 1 page of legislation, and it turns into 10,000 pages of rules and other stuff that have nothing to do with
that nobody has read.
Yeah, that no one reads, and they go, well, to know what's in the law, we have to pass it. And I'm like, that is the most asinine thing, but that's how government rolls. And that's why you can't vote your way out of what we're seeing, and that things are just going to get a lot worse until really people are ready to fight back, because you cannot vote your way. Slaves cannot vote their way to freedom. What they can do, leave to some other place and start something new, which you can't do because we're looking at a global tyranny, or you fight back. And people aren't ready to fight back yet. And so that's why it's just going to keep growing and getting worse and worse and worse, because we're not at that point yet. No real revolution did not end. There's no such thing as a peaceful revolution. It is a violent process and will always be a violent process because tyranny will absolutely commit violence and against anyone who stands up to them. And so unless you can fight against that, you're not going to win.
I'm not interested in a violent revolution because you're just, at the end of the day, somebody's still holding a sword.
Absolutely.
What my view of what a peaceful revolution would be is to just ignore them out of existence.
But the problem is that government views silence as consent, and they have control over you, and they don't care if you ignore them. If you violate any of their rules, they will hem you up. And that's the problem with it. Now, I'm a very big believer on my main focus, again, in my book. It's not about revolution. I don't want a revolution. I want evolution. We have to evolve as a species. We have to evolve as a society. And that starts with the understanding of critical thinking and what really government is and how it's the root cause of all of our problems. And to move forward with a real solution, you have to understand what the root cause is. And most people aren't ready to have that discussion on agreeing that government is the root cause. So now how do we fix everything? Most people are like, even my dad, he reads all my stuff and he was like, well, what about the roads?
Yeah.
And I talk about it in my taxation is theft chapter. And he's like, yeah, but what about the roads? And I'm like, see, that's the problem. You don't even agree that government is the problem. And so how can we even come up with real solutions when you won't meet me there? You just want the answer. And I'm like, so I have to solve all problems of all things. And because that's really what about the roads? It's like, well, there's other options, but you just don't want to believe it because it goes against your belief.
I love the what about the roads argument, and we'll end here pretty quick. But if people say something like that, I'm like, have you ever driven through Memphis? I like to describe Memphis as one giant pothole.
It's yeah.
You take a 30-minute trip through Memphis or wherever. It seems like no matter where you live in this area, you're always 30 minutes away from Memphis at some point. So it's a 30-minute. Once you get into Memphis, you spend most of your trip apologizing to your vehicle.
Getting back to that evolution, not revolution, the real way for us to evolve is through chaos and strife. And so during an upheaval, like even a revolution, a major real revolution, when people are really fighting back and everything starts to collapse fully, that's when you can actually really evolve. But it's going to take that revolution. It has to start. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to evolve. But we should be focusing on evolving, not revolving. Because again, if you just move back to an earlier form of statism, everyone gets complacent and be like, look, we did it. But 4 generations from now, 10 generations from now, it goes right back to being tyrannical. It didn't solve the problem. It just kicked the can down the road.
Right. And what I was going to end with is I was going to ask you again, is there hope? And I think you've given us a way towards that.
No, I think I don't see hope. I'm a collapsitarian. This system has to collapse for us to move forward. There's no way to save any of this, especially not through voting. And no one's willing. I don't see any spark that could cause a group of people to wake up and to actually really fight back. So like the album I dropped, Militant Anarchist, it's not about fighting this government tyranny. It's about information warfare. It's about trying to wake people up that are in this deathless sleep and wake them up to the realities of what's really going on. Because if they don't, they're just going to get hemmed over and ran over and driven into this technological age where everyone's connected to AI through, Musk's Neuralink. And now you're really controlled by whoever is running that AI. Because it's artificial intelligence. It's not true intelligence. So it's not thinking for itself. It's still maintained by principles and rules and other things and limitations that are set upon it. So and like I said, I do think that we're reaching this critical point of a true natural age ender that happens in every 12,000 years, roughly. And like I said, in my first book, I cover it in greater detail, and I'd be happy to discuss that with anyone later if you just reach out to me. But I do think we're going to see this upheaval and this natural reset happen. And I think everything we're witnessing today is gearing humanity towards this natural event. And again, if it looks like it could happen by 2035 to 2050, and it lines up with, World Economic Forum's prediction of by 2030, we'll own nothing and we'll be happy. gearing us towards these 15-minute smart cities or freedom cities that Trump likes to call them now. And like, it's,
Yeah.
I see things are going to get a lot worse, but during this upheaval, we have the chance and opportunity to evolve during this strife. And my hope is all of my work at some point will allow that to happen, at least as a small fraction, because natural rights are embedded in the fabric of reality. Doesn't matter how much indoctrination or anything that government does, how many generations they can do it in. It's written in the fabric of reality. If someone can think for themselves, they have the ability to see that pattern and recognize the truths. It just could take 1,000 years. It could take a long time, but it's still there. And that's why it's this never ending cycle, life cycle of government, because the natural rights are embedded in our reality and those rules are there. And you can see it and it played out along all forms of animals.
Yeah. And there's a couple more points. And I think that's, I've considered myself a collapsitarian as well, but also as a follower of Jesus, and no king but Christ. Our mentality as Christian anarchists. I feel like now I don't believe we're going to see this until Jesus actually returns, because the Bible talks about him putting these nations under his feet, basically crushing them back into dust. Now, said all that to say this, I think that you're right that the evolving is the route, and I'm a huge advocate for folks like you, and I tell people all the time, if you've got some content, if you've got, even like you said a while ago, even if it's a small fraction of people that it might put an impression on, I encourage people all the time to write something. Write a book, do a podcast, make a song, something, some content out there to get people thinking so they can evolve into this mentality of, oh, I really do want to be free. I just didn't know what that looks like. And I think what you're doing with your work, I think is very important. And what I love about your book so much, and they're not only great reads, but they're so packed full of information. Like, you can buy these books and keep them on hand, and you've got a resource. That's one thing I love about books that can be a good resource, where I can go back to and be like, okay, but I want you to think about this for a second. Read Jeffrey Hann's book and think about what he's saying in this, and give it some real thought. Try some critical thinking for once in your life, for the first time in your life. Not saying that people aren't doing it. We've done it. I mean, I believe there's hope, because if anybody like me who went from neoconservatism to anarchist can do that, I believe anybody can. Because, I mean, if you'd have known me 20 years ago, man,
yeah,
I was not the same person. And I'd have sat here and argued with you the entire time on this show, believing what I used to believe, because I thought I had it all figured out. And like I said earlier, when you kind of start waking up to that, it's a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. If it's uncomfortable, it means you're evolving, you're moving forward, you're doing something that's going to be for the betterment of yourself and society and your friends and your family, and even people you don't like. Even the people we don't like, we still want them to be free. And I've tried to stress that over and over to folks who are still dug in. I'm not against you. I want you to realize that you are a slave. I want you to realize that you are not free in this country, and it's time to wake up and start thinking for yourself.
Yeah.
Now, Jeffrey, I want you to go and plug all your stuff. This has been a great conversation. Again, like I said, I appreciate you sending me the book and letting me go through it and having this conversation. Folks, if y'all have not read his first book, pick it up, because that stuff can come right back around. You're going to have all this information in that book, and this next book, pick it up, because there's a ton of information in it as well. But go and plug your stuff, and I'll let you get out of here.
Yeah. So my main site is Journalistic Revolution, journalisticrevolution.com. That's me, all my articles. I've been writing since 2016 on all of this stuff. My first book, COVID-19, Short Path to You'll Own Nothing and You'll Be Happy. Welcome to New Age of Tyranny. I cover 141 published journal studies throughout that book, just to show how detailed that book really is. And then my second book, The Fallacious Belief in Government, Warp Speed Toward Tyranny. This is all about why government is a fallacious idea, and why it's a logical fallacy to put your faith in it, and that there is another way forward, another path. So that's really the focus of those two books. I am working on a third one but I don't know when I'll get around to that. That one's on plasma cosmology, the theory of everything. So it's a little bit different. It's going to be it's definitely more scientific based. But I work on music. I'm doing a weekly music generation for the top news stories of the past week. And I also have a news article that I release every Sunday for the past week. I've been doing it now for the past few weeks. So all on my site. And then, I can be found on X under Jeffrey Hann or Instagram under jeffrey.a.hann. Those are my two most active things, but the censorship, you can definitely, they say they're not censoring people anymore, but you can still tell that people are throttled based on the account and the number of people that they have following them. So
100%.
But
yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah. No, you're preaching to the choir on that one.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Also, my books are available in ebook and audiobook. If you want to give it a listen instead of just reading it, but physical copies are always better.
I like having physical copies. They're easily accessible to me. So, and I like to have the book in my hand. It's something about that, just having the book in my hand, turning the pages. That's just the way I like to read. I tried to listen to some books on like Spotify and stuff, and then I catch myself daydreaming while I'm driving.
Yeah. I have to listen to it over and over again.
I missed something along the way. All right, buddy, I'm gonna let you get out of here. I really appreciate your time and coming on and doing this. And I guess when you get that third book out, holler at me. We'll do it
definitely.
Again. All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.